Well, welcome. Uh, my name is Georgia Court. I'm the proprietor at Bookstore One, and we will just let people wander in as we wander in. Want to let you know that in the chat there is a link to purchase Brad's book, which is titled Wax Pack on the Open Road in Search of Baseball's Afterlife. And this evening we're going to have a conversation between Brad and Elsie Souza. And then we're going to open things up to anyone who's out there with us in our nice little cozy gathering to have a conversation. But first, what I would like to do is to introduce Brad so that he can read a little excerpt from his book, maybe talk about it for just a few minutes, and then we will bring in Elsie for the discussion. Brad Balukjian is a biology professor, author, and journalist whose first book, The Wax Pack, was named one of NPR's best books of 2020. He has written for CNN, the Los Angeles Times, Rolling Stone, National Geographic, and many others. He lives in Oakland, California, and that's where he is today. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you very much, Georgia, and thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, it's sunny California right here, and nice day. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. So yes, I'll be reading a little bit from my book right here, The Wax Pack, and the book came out last year, and it's well, we'll get into it more in discussion, but it's the story of my attempt to track down all the players in a single pack of 1986 baseball cards and kind of tell the story of that journey. And so I thought, when I was thinking about what to read, I thought I should actually read a section from the book, or the section in the book where I actually went to Sarasota. And so I'll read a part of this chapter. This is from kind of the middle of the book, a chapter called Chasing Carlton. And just to give you some context, this is Carlton Fisk was one of the players in this pack of cards. And Carlton Fisk spends part of the year living in Sarasota. And so in my attempt to track him down, when I was able to reach his people, they said, "I'm sorry, but Carlton is not interested in meeting with you." So, as was kind of a theme in the book, where one of the players was not willing or able to talk to me, I would still did my best to try to get a hold of them and do what I could to track them down. So in my section here that I'm going to read, this is about how I went about trying to find Carlton Fisk. So here we go. What do you do when someone you're writing about doesn't want to talk to you? I've hunkered down for a couple nights in the West Florida city of Tampa, within striking distance of Carlton's home in Bradenton. While many write off Florida as a converted swamp that's home to Disney World, it's a remarkably complex state, a mashup of Old South, Northeastern snowbirds, and Latinx immigrants. Following a visit to the Tampa Bay History Center, I sip on a strawberry lemonade at Ruby Tuesday and look at a map, spotting Bradenton 60 miles to the south. I have an address for Carlton's house from public record searches, but imagine I won't get anywhere close to the front door. But I have another lead. I'm texting with a source, a sports agent whom we'll call Gene, who's familiar with many of the athletes who frequent the area. Tampa's warm climate is ideal for grooming ball players, and it's no coincidence that Wade Boggs, Gary Sheffield, waxpacker Doc Gooden, who now lives in New York, and many others grew up here. Gene is familiar with these various celebrity personalities and is sympathetic to my conundrum. Carlton golfs almost every day at this private course called the Founders Club in Sarasota. He likes to drink after he plays. You can probably find him at the clubhouse bar, he types. Can I get onto the property? I reply. You can ask for a tour of the club. You tell them that you're interested in buying a home there and would like to check out the golf course first, he says. So that's it. To catch Carlton, I'm going to have to ambush him. But before that, I need to somehow convince the staff of one of West Florida's poshest real estate developments that I belong there to begin with. Let me remind you that I'm currently eating my dinner at a Ruby Tuesday. This could go very, very badly. While I drive down the West Florida coast to Sarasota, my mind swirls. For the first time in the trip, I am truly scared. One of my longstanding OCD compulsions is being way too honest. My therapist, Tom, termed this hyperscrupulosity, a fairly common type of OCD. And so lying to get to Carlton has my heart racing. One incident from childhood stands out. One day after school, I walked into our kitchen to find a glass broken on the floor and reported it to my mom. When she asked me if I knew what had happened, I told her that maybe I had broken it, potentially confessing to something I knew I hadn't done. The OCD brain can be a sinister thing. Even if my ruse succeeds and I get to Carlton in the clubhouse bar, I have no clue what I'm going to say. Thanks for blowing me off. Nice home run. Can you pass me a coaster? A bloom of bright pink flowers on the side of the freeway streaks by my window and it hits me. Orchids. In my research on Carlton, I stumbled across a surprising and odd fun fact. The Hall of Fame catcher also happens to be a devoted orchid collector. The more I think about it, the more it makes sense that he would find a passion for orchids. They are among the most finicky of all cultivated plants, demanding constant attention from growers to keep environmental conditions just so. Only the most dedicated, disciplined horticulturists dare to enter the orchid trade. But Carlton is up to the challenge, having expanded his collection to more than 40 varieties and 300 plants during his retirement. Orchids, I decide, will be my entry point. A taxonomist myself, although of insects, not plants, I can bond with him over a common language, Latin, as I inquire about his favorite genera and species, talk shop about our favorite pollination techniques. I won't even bring up baseball. I exit onto Fruitville Road, a wide two-lane street lined with drive-in churches and the occasional strip club, more sin and salvation, scanning for signs of the Founders Club. It's way too hot for coffee, yet I can't stop drinking it, somehow believing that the caffeine is going to make lying easier. I've got bullet points for my story. I'm a biology professor at UC Berkeley who's obsessed with golf and just really want a second home on the East Coast where I can play and get away. About 25% of that is true, which will hopefully make it slightly easier to pull off. The club's website has a page dedicated entirely to its dress code, which reads in that perfectly passive-aggressive tone, "It is expected that members and their guests will choose to dress in a fashion befitting the surroundings and atmosphere provided in the setting of the Founders Club." I brought out the only semi-dressy attire I have on the trip, a seafoam green polo shirt and khakis, which I desperately hope are befitting the surroundings. I look in my trunk, and beneath a pile of old towels, I find a pair of golf shoes I had bought for a round of golf at my sister's wedding 5 years ago, the last time I saw them. The Founders Club features not just an 18-hole Robert Trent Jones Jr. golf course, it also has custom-built London Bay homes scattered about its premises. I see a sign for the club, turn in, and immediately stopped at a gate. "Welcome to the Founders Club," says the immaculate attendant, his white glove service perfected. Here we go. So I'll stop there as that's sort of the lead into my adventure of trying to sneak into the Founders Club to find Carlton Fisk, and just pause there and I guess pass it back to Elsie.
Yeah, well, let me introduce Elsie to all of you. Elsie Souza is the bookstore's events manager, but for most of her life, she lived in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where she was a teacher of special needs children, and then for many years, the manager of Congressman Barney Frank's office. She's passionate about sports and politics, especially anything that has Boston in the title. And Elsie is particularly proud of having a significant role in bringing the Orioles to Sarasota for spring training. And she is the ultimate baseball fan, as anyone who wanders into the store and talks sports will tell you. So welcome, Susie, and Susie, right. Welcome, Elsie. And Brad, I'll turn it over to the both of you.
Thank you.
Well, Brad, I'm delighted to meet you, but I have to ask you, how does a nice Rhode Island boy become a Phillies fan and not a Red Sox fan?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. Well, all I can say is when I was growing up in Rhode Island, I never followed the crowd. And so it wasn't in my nature to go for the home team. So that left me as a kid, as a free agent fan. And the reason why I became a Phillies fan is pretty ridiculous. And that's when I was about 5 years old. I heard the name Philadelphia. Well, first of all, my favorite letter for whatever reason was F. And I heard the name Philadelphia Phillies, and I thought that was the greatest thing I had ever heard. And little did I know, or I couldn't spell, that it was actually PH. But by the time I discovered it, it was too late. I was already a Phillies fan. So that's the whole reason.
I love the story and I loved reading it, but I always have to ask someone from New England why they become something other than a Red Sox fan.
If it makes you feel any better, I always rooted for the Red Sox over the Yankees. So if that makes you feel any better.
This is very good. This is a very good thing that you did. Absolutely. So let's talk about this incredible book. I loved it. I loved it. I'm making it a staff pick. And I hope next year you come through Sarasota and we can do a big event, related to it. So you get this package of Topps baseball cards, 14 players, and one stick of gum. And I think Mike wanted to know, about the gum. Was it delicious, that gum, or what was the story when you finally ate that gum?
I mean, the gum wasn't delicious in 1986 when it was made, let alone in 2015 when I removed it from the pack and it was fossilized. But I still tried to chew it. It was terrible.
Okay. Maybe it was terrible even back then. No. Everything was delicious back then. So you have these 14 cards, and now what are you going to decide to do with them? And what was your premise behind all this?
Yeah, well, I just love the idea of being constrained by whatever random players are in one pack of cards, right? I think anyone who collected baseball cards remembers the thrill of the unknown, of tearing open a pack and you don't know who you're going to get. And so I like the idea of structuring a book around the random chance of one pack of cards. And I chose that year because it's the first year that I remember collecting them as a kid. So I'm 40 years old now, and I was 6 in 1986. And so I thought, well, why not get a pack that had never been opened? Because collectors would often keep them sealed. And then whoever's in this pack that I open up, I'll go find that. But I wanted it to be, I mean, you could write many different types of books with this premise. I didn't have to go travel 11,341 miles to find these guys. I could have just done it from home and picked up the phone, but I knew that would not be as interesting a narrative. And I really wanted to make this a travel book, a cross-country journey where I would actually be in the story myself and kind of have the reader, kind of be the eyes and ears for the reader as I go off on this crazy journey and try to find these people and just describe what I see and what I experience. And so the premise was very simply, what happens to baseball players long after they're done playing. And as you see in the book, it became a lot more than that because of how much these guys opened up to me.
Yeah, and I have to tell you before you go on, what struck me was, these players, they really trusted you, which is, they did not have to trust you, but they did. So good for you that they did, and they told you things I'm sure that they hadn't said in many years to other people. But that's what struck me. So Good for you, Brad. So you traveled all those miles, 11,341 miles in a Honda Accord. And what happened to the Honda Accord? Did it die or is it still going?
Oh no, it's just parked outside the
I
front of the house.
love it. Having
now
had many Honda Accords, I love you for that. And it will keep on going. Good. And you had 123 cups of coffee.
That's
Was
right.
there any favorite cup of coffee? Okay. Dunkin'
Well,
Donuts, no?
I had a lot of bad cups of coffee in the middle of the country at some gas stations, but no, I had to have some fuel to keep me going on this quest. So that was my emotional crutch, I think.
I love it. I love it. So, you talked about baseball being a mental game, which struck me again, which it really is. And the fact is that there are different quotes that you do about it. It's very long. The baseball game is very long, but it also gives you time, to think, so during the course of your book, you speak a lot, from your insight about baseball. And so I urge people to read the book so you can capture that. So let's talk about the players you met along the way. And what was the one quality they all had, these 14 players? Well, I think there were 3 that you didn't see, but what was the quality you think they all had?
Well, I would say that all of them had a certain, all but one, I would say, had a certain confidence and a certain kind of almost implicit swagger that even 30 years after they were done playing, and they're certainly not, physically what they were when they were in their 30s or 20s, but they all had this really like abiding confidence that you could just detect. And I think that the one guy that didn't really have that was a pitcher for the Milwaukee Brewers named Jaime Kokenauer, who was by far the least successful of the baseball players. And he openly told me that he always struggled with not having that kind of extra edge mentally to, deal with the inevitable failure in baseball. And I think that's, in order to be successful at that level in baseball, you have to, immediately let go of the failure. And if you dwell on the mistakes, you're done. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that he was the one guy that wasn't very successful in playing baseball. But he had the physical skill, just didn't have the ability to let go of the failure. But on the other hand, he was also probably the most well-adjusted guy in his life now. So there's kind of a cost to some of that fame, I think. And, some of the players who were not as big stars in baseball actually seem to be doing better in their post-baseball lives because they had done more planning. They had, not maybe been so spoiled by all the attention and the success. So that was one thing. The other thing I would say is that one of the things that I took out of the book and the experience of meeting these guys is that we have a lot more in common with them than we ever realized. In a way, I think the book humanizes these players and kind of brings them down to our level. And we realize that these guys deal with the same things that we all deal with, that the same struggles. I mean, a lot of these players having dealt with divorce and addiction and depression, and a lot of them ended up having, really kind of poor relationships with their fathers. That was an interesting theme that came out. And so, as you said, and I was really touched and appreciated how much they trusted me with sharing some of this stuff. But I think when you read about them and you see what they're like as people, it kind of, as a fan, makes you feel closer to these players. And again, like you have more in common with them than you might have thought.
Well, we see that during spring training. Of course, this year is very different, but usually for spring training, you're very close to the players, so there's an intimacy that develops,
Right.
and then it goes away when they get, when they go north or, wherever to play. But I was struck by everything that you just said. And did you change your mind about any of the players after, you know, after you did this?
I don't know if I changed my mind. I think I didn't expect, I didn't know that this theme of their relationships with their fathers was going to be
Yeah,
something that came out. The father-son relationship is obviously a huge part of baseball, and anyone who's seen the movie Field of Dreams, the moment of playing catch and all of that. But what surprised me was, as I would meet with guys like Steve Yeager and Rick Sutcliffe and Don Carmen and Randy Reddy and all these players that were sharing with me, some really heart-wrenching stories about how, their fathers were abusive or ran out on the family, and the players themselves got emotional in talking about that. It's not something that I expected going into the trip. And I think some of that is also somewhat generational in that, these players that I wrote about are now in their 50s and 60s. So their fathers are from, kind of the World War II generation. And I think, men in general from that generation just were not, and even the players I wrote about, not encouraged to be open about their feelings and to be, sort of emotionally vulnerable. And I think that's changing in society for the better. But you sort of see the effects of that on some of these players and how that affected their outlook on life, but also how a lot of them reversed that with their own kids. So someone like Steve Yeager, who was a catcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers, told me about how the first time his dad went to see him play, he got so drunk he passed out in the clubhouse of the team and embarrassed him. But when I met up with Steve Yeager in Los Angeles, I was able to also meet up with his son, who's now in college, who's playing baseball, and to see how good their relationship is, was really nice to see that, Steve had not repeated the same mistake that had been done to him.
well, it's fast. And who touched your soul most? Was it meeting the person that you always wanted to meet, your hero? And who was your hero for our audience?
Yeah. So I again, being a sort of an unusual kid, my favorite players were more the bench warmer types, the underdogs. And so my favorite player was a guy named Don Carmen, who was a pitcher for the Phillies, and he was in the pack and in the book. And one of the things I do in the book is when I met with guys, I really tried to do different activities with them. So, one player, I go to get a hitting lesson. I go to an art museum. I go to a 4th of July barbecue, gym, go bowling. With my hero as a kid, Don Carmen, I went to the zoo. And, to me, it made it a more entertaining narrative to do all these different things. But with my favorite player, Don Carmen, we met at the zoo in Naples. And he was somebody that totally exceeded my wildest expectations of what kind of person he is. And just so unusual in that, most baseball players didn't go to, at least from this generation, didn't go to college. And when they're done playing, they often, don't really pursue education. But Don Carmen, after he was done playing, went and got his bachelor's degree and then his master's degree, and is now working on a doctorate in psychology. And his job now is he's on the staff of Scott Boras, who's probably the most famous agent in all of baseball. And Don Carmen's job is to be the psychologist for Scott Boras's clients. So when Bryce Harper or Steven Strasburg or any of these big stars, go into a slump, Don Carmen is the guy that gets on a plane and goes and meets with them to try to get them right. So he was a really just a thoughtful guy. And again, how he opened up to me, he grew up in this little tiny town of 200 people in Western Oklahoma. And I actually went and visited the town before I met up with him in Florida. Just so I wanted to see it for myself. And I went to this town and I found his childhood coach, and I went to his house and interviewed him and got a tour of the town. And when you do that and you go to the place where someone grew up, you can really get a better sense for who they are and kind of what formed them.
So, yeah, so a lot of them came from very small towns, obviously, and a lot of them went home again too, which was interesting. So they were very comfortable going home, obviously. But I wondered, as you discussed the relationship with the fathers and sons, but I thought the wives played a major role, whichever wife it was, in their afterlife. And could you, discuss that somewhat?
Yeah, I think, one of I call it the 3 Ds, that sort of the syndrome of the ex-ball player as soon as they retire is divorce, drugs, and depression. And several of these guys had dealt with that, but some of the ones that had not gotten divorced, like Jaime Kokenauer, Gary Templeton, I was able to meet with their wives. And, where they were still with their wife of many years, that was something I wanted to do, was to sit down with the wife, without the husband there, and really know what was it like to be married to a baseball player, that would disappear for all those years. I mean, all those months of the year. And someone like Gary Templeton, who was a player for the Cardinals and the Padres, his wife, Glenda, who I spent some time with, she told me that when their kids were being raised, Glenda, she was, taking the kids to all the practices. And I mean, she was kind of an athlete herself. So she would, go out there and play softball. But now that Gary her husband was at home and, in his retirement, and they had grandkids, she said, now it was Gary's turn to take the grandkids and do all the things that he had missed out on when their kids were small. So, it's an amazing respect for the wives that kept things together while their husbands were out playing.
And I loved one poignant piece, and I don't remember, but you will know. Obviously, I was trying to find it in my notes, about when one of them came home unexpectedly, and his little boy said, "Oh, is it September?" Right? And I've forgotten who that was, but that so touched my heart. If you can just mention that.
That was Lee Mazzilli, who played for the Mets and the Yankees, and and he had retired, and his wife, who he's still with, Danny, when Lee Mazzilli retired, he then tried to do 7 different things to replace baseball. He tried to go do some acting. He went into real estate. He started a independent baseball league. He had a restaurant. It was all these different things. And finally his wife said, "Lee, you have to go back to baseball. You got some unfinished business there." And so they had this really, they had young kids still, and they had this long talk, and they agreed, okay, I'm going to go back. He was going to go back coaching, but he would try to come back every couple of weeks. And then his kids knew that, in September, he'd be back home when the minor league season was over. So yeah, there's this really touching story of Lee. I think he was coaching in Tampa, and his family lived in Connecticut. And he came home to surprise the family unexpectedly. And his son was probably 6 or 7. And, he goes up and wakes up his son, who's kind of groggy. And the first thing he says is, "Oh, is it September? Because why is daddy home?" And he said that broke his heart, that that in that moment he was ready to quit the coaching, and his wife said, "It's okay, we'll get through it," And he did, and he went back and he coached, and he actually managed for the Orioles for a couple of years. And when that was out of his system, he retired again, and I think this time was much happier, much more content.
Well, that was very poignant. I truly loved it. So let's talk about these baseball cards. Do you still keep, are they framed or where are these cards?
Well, my actual childhood collection is still in my closet. I'll still pull them out
Right.
now and again and flip through them. The actual cards that were in the pack, when I would meet with the players, I would have them autograph them.
Right.
And I need to, I'm not someone that tends to like hang stuff up, but I do need to make some kind of a display because it would be cool to have all the cards from the pack, with the book cover. So I'll have to put that together at some point.
You know what? Just enjoy it whichever way you want.
Right. Elsie, what do you say
Yeah,
we see if we've got Mike and Robin with us, if they'd like to join the conversation at all? What do you think? You have to unmute if anyone wants to say something.
Yes, I'm unmuted. This is Robin Raden. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Hi. I'm very interested in the connection between your day job as a biology professor and this sideline as a writer. It strikes me that there are many connections, just in my own mind, extrapolating in terms of this methodology that you pursued, kind of an experimental method that you were identifying and analyzing a species, perhaps, and its differentiation and commonality and all of these things that relate to your day job. I don't know if these things were in your mind or whether they operate in you to pursue your subject matter or your method, but it would be interesting to hear about that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Robin. And you're absolutely right that my two careers as a scientist and a journalist have a lot in common. And I've actually thought about that in both cases, you start with some kind of question you want to answer. You have a hypothesis, you collect data to test that hypothesis, you synthesize all that data, and then you reach a conclusion. And so I very much think that this type of journalism is, I would never have guessed when I was getting a PhD studying Tahitian insects that process, the scientific method, would be useful in writing a book about 30-year-old baseball cards, but
they don't talk back.
Yeah, right. That's right. Bugs are not going to talk back to me, but it's the same process. It's the same, going out there in the field for me, doing these interviews and gathering data. That's trying to make sense and understand, as you said, what are the things these guys have in common? How are they different? So to me, there isn't as much of a gap between my biology job and my writing job. And, I think a lot of the qualities of a good scientist, inquisitive, curious, detail-driven, detail-oriented, are the same qualities that make a good journalist. And so I'm pretty comfortable.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah. Well, for me, I studied both in college, and then I worked at a magazine as an editor, and then I went and got my PhD, and then I went back and worked at the LA Times, and then I decided, I'm just going to do both. So I've always kind of done the writing and done the teaching, and I'm happy with both of them.
And does the one enrich the other?
Yeah.
The other
Well,
influence the other?
The difference is that no one would ever want to read my scientific writing because it's, the most, it's funny, you write something for a scientific journal and you have to actively remind yourself to not write in an engaging way, because it's the most dry stuff. But that's what I like about this type of journalism is, narrative nonfiction, is you have a chance to explore your creative side a little bit more. You can have a little more fun and more voice than you do when you're writing a scientific report.
Mike, did you have a question?
Oh, George, yeah, thank you. So I have a couple, Brad, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, interesting. One of my favorite books is David Halberstam's Teammates. So I'm just wondering if you met players along the line that you didn't expect, or did the players talk about some of the teammates that they still kept in touch with?
Yeah, that book, Mike, was when I wrote a book proposal for this. I actually cited that book as one of my main inspirations, or, I was aspiring to write something like that, because, David Halberstam's style is the kind of style that I aspire to. And that's a great example of that type of writing. And so I'm glad you cited that book. But yeah, I mean, these guys, it's interesting because I would say that the thing that they miss the most out of being a baseball player is nothing to do with the actual game. It's the camaraderie of their teammates. One of the players, Rance Mullenix, told me, he's like, if you could give me a choice between going back in time and, going 4 for 4 with 2 home runs, or just going back and being able to hang out with my buddies, I would just go hang out with my buddies. So, that the level of immersion that these guys experience as teammates creates such a level of intimacy and closeness. It's like almost like military, right? It's like that same level of bond that people form in things like the military. And I think, like the military, what's interesting is that often once they're done playing, they really fall out of touch. And it's like, maybe it's because it hurts too much to no longer have that same closeness that you once had, and so it's easier to just kind of compartmentalize and go about your own way. But so I didn't find that the guys were necessarily like in close touch still with all their teammates, but whenever they get together at a reunion or an event for the team, then you see them immediately go back to their old roles and telling old war stories and all of that. So there were some exceptions, like someone like Steve Yeager, who still coaches with the Dodgers, was still very much close to Rick Monday and, those guys from those Dodger teams. I'm trying to think of who else, somebody like Rick Sutcliffe is still in the game as a commentator. So he's very much, plugged into the players. So I think that they may maintain a friendship here and there, but it's not like they're in close touch with all of those guys from their past.
One more, if not to break the suspense, but buy the book, right? But did you finally meet with Carlton Fisk, and was he open as open as others were?
I did meet with him, not in the way that I expected. So the story that I was just reading from, I ended up not seeing him there, but I did see him in Cooperstown at the Hall of Fame a couple weeks later. And unfortunately, I didn't have any time with him. And so I never got to really, probe and get in depth with him like the other guys. But I think some of that is, again, the players that were the biggest stars like Fisk and Dwight Gooden were much harder to access. And I think that's not a coincidence, because they've become these big stars who kind of still live off of that celebrity, and they're just not as open to, meeting with a random writer. So
I think, you probably found exceptions. I did when I actually at the Hall of Fame, I met Don Larson.
Oh yeah.
And he was just a very nice guy. And then, and he signed I had a Yogi Berra ball, so he signed that one. So that's sort of a trophy.
Oh, that's great.
But there was a picture from he played with the Indians. He wrote a book too. Forget his name.
Mm-hmm. Bob Feller or
Bob Feller. Yeah. Bob Feller. decent guy. And he was in Cooperstown there one year, but thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Elsie, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? I kind of, I felt like I
Oh, no,
jumped in the
no,
middle
no.
of your conversation.
I wanted to ask you, are you writing anything else? Are you writing another book? I know you told me this will come out in paperback soon, which is great, and will carry in the store, but are you writing another one? Not about baseball, about something else, I bet.
Right. So I think most writers will tell you that they've always got like 17 ideas in their back pocket. You know, I mean, I literally have a file on my computer that's called like book ideas and article ideas. And I know I won't ever get to write a lot of them, but I have a lot of, kind of back to what Robin was saying, a lot of ideas around science. And so my specialty in biology is studying island ecosystems and the animals and plants that evolve on islands. And I discovered 17 species in Tahiti and that I am describing. So I think my next books would probably be something about relating to the people and the organisms that live on islands, because as you may, I mean, in Florida, there's many islands, you may know. I mean, there's a lot of fascinating, quirky characters, people that own islands, that live on islands. So I thought about some ideas about, you know, writing about sort of what is it about islands that create these, you know, different personalities. And but the challenge for me right now and everyone is, you know, I can't do this type of reporting during the pandemic. You know, to do this kind of book, you have to go out and travel and meet with people and, you know, be able to build relationships and all that. So I'm kind of waiting to see, you know, when things calm down some more.
So I loved this book, but everybody, you have to buy it just to feel the book. How did the University of Nebraska ever figure out the quality of the paper?
Yeah, they did an amazing job with the waxiness of the paper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
it sounds so trite, but you know what? It's amazing. I mean,
yeah. Well, they made the book look just like a pack of 86 Topps cards, which I think was brilliant. And so yeah, it's just it's fun just to, I mean, and frankly, like the original idea, when I first thought of the idea, I imagined the book looking just like a pack because, you know, same shape and everything. And they did a great job pulling that off.
so what was it like meeting the Topps people? Topps is out of business, obviously, and you met with some of them. How poignant was that for you and for them, you know,
Right.
in this small town?
So what I did in the book is I actually opened and closed the book set with the factory workers that literally made these cards. So I was able, it was not easy, but I was able to track down the people that manufactured these cards in 1985. And I sort of set the book in the beginning in the factory with these cards being produced. And it was very intentional to open and close the book with them, because one of the points I wanted to make in the book was that it's about that baseball's beauty is about much more than the players. It's about the community and everyone connected to the game. That one of the things that when I met with these Topps workers, again, even 30 years after they had worked for the company, they still had that closeness, that camaraderie, the same way the baseball players did. And it's just, you know, to me, one of the things I say in the book is that what makes baseball so special as a sport is it is the perfect backdrop for building relationships, because it is slow. It's a ponderous, slow game. But that to me is what makes it so special and unique, is that it's so slow that you can actually go to a game and you can spend time and, you know, have a conversation and really build a relationship with somebody. And so to me, that just celebrates what makes baseball so different.
Yeah, I was so struck by that. And, you know, I was thinking as a Red Sox person, you know, in the 7th inning when they play Sweet Caroline.
Yeah.
I mean, where else would that happen in the world? Really, think about it. But there
Right.
isn't another sport like, you know, like baseball. And, you know, I know Georgia loves baseball, and Robin, and obviously Mike does, and you do, and I do. It's very, very special. And I remember when the Red Sox finally won, you know, the World Series. My father was no longer alive, but I brought all the newspapers to the cemetery so that he would be able, you know, so that he knew what was happening in the world, because you grew up this baseball fan. It's what we knew. We weren't, you know, football fans. Well, we might have been basketball fans because of the Celtics, but, you know, baseball was very special. And I had a dear aunt, until the day she died in her 90s. She used to, she never watched baseball, but she listened to it on the radio
Yeah.
every game. So it's that kind of a sport where you listen to it and pay attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Baseball on the radio is just a wonderful, wonderful thing.
So did you come away with the same special person that you still liked? Or was there someone else who met your
Well,
who you'd like to know better?
The way that I say is that I ended the book idolizing the players less, but respecting them more. And that to me, my relationship shifted. You know, as a kid, these baseball players they might as well be comic book heroes. They're larger than life, right? It's very simple. But getting to know them as an adult and seeing the complexity and the flaws and, you know, all of that, and realizing, like I was saying earlier, how much we have in common with them made me really respect them for different reasons. And it wasn't about how many home runs they hit or any of that. It was about just recognizing, you know, how they live their lives, how they have, you know, just the people that they are. And by and large, they were great people, the people, you know, getting to know them and what they're really all about.
And how did it change you, my friend? Because you had issues to deal with too. So
yeah, well, I tell people, yeah. So in the book, I talk myself about my own life and, you know, being in my mid 30s and still single and wondering where I'm going in life. And I think what I liked about the journey was that I was the same age that the players were when they retired and they had to move on with their lives. So I kind of used it as a chance for, like, what can I learn from these guys about what they went through that I can apply to my own life? And one of the things that I took away from it is I call baseball players accidental Buddhists, because they're actually really good at being in the present moment and kind of letting things go, and not getting hung up on what happened before or what might happen next, right? And that's, I think, a healthy way to live your life, is not living in the past or the future, but kind of being right where you are. And so I really appreciated that about them.
well, I have so enjoyed reading the book and, you know, speaking to you. And I know you'll be in Sarasota next year, so we can visit. But, you know, if there aren't any other questions, is there anything you want to end on, Brad?
No, I mean, I really appreciate, you know, these are, you know, obviously would love to be meeting everyone in person and signing books and everything, but I appreciate everyone for joining me and having this conversation. And thank you, Elsie, and thank you, Georgia, for having me.
Well, thank you.
Elsie's comment about Sweet Caroline, I was passing a pub in Dublin and they were singing Sweet Caroline.
Oh,
As
yeah.
they should.
The worldwide phenomenon.
That's great.
Absolutely. Well, if there are no more comments, well, thank you, Brad.
I certainly look forward to reading this book, and I look forward to his next one. And I think he can go down to the Keys and find all those characters and those plants and everything,
Right.
and continue. I don't think they realize there's a pandemic down there.
Right.
So I can't wait to. You really has some great ideas.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank all of you so much. And thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
It's been delightful to
Brad.
get to know you all the way out there in California. So welcome to Sarasota.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.